kick it off and first thank the Mongabay team for being our first repeat presenter based on the success and the interest in the first one. Thank you guys for coming back. I'd also like to do a shout out to Shelley for all her work behind the scenes, for Linda and Gary for making this happen, making the initial introduction. And I'm going to turn over to Charles Lin. Charles is a 2019 fellow, and he is also the lead for the ALI Climate and Energy Impact Group, which many of us are involved in. So Charles, please take it away.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure again to join our colleagues at New York City and Mongabay to present this part two of the webinar. I first came across Mongabay when I needed some data on flooding, and Mongabay had precisely what I needed: a global distribution of flood events, including the Global South, on a particular year. And the site had exactly what I needed. This was several months ago. But Mongabay is much more than a repository for environmental data. It is a global collection, a global network of local journalists writing inspiring stories, some of which are the result of months of investigative journalism. And today, we will hear about the backstory of Mongabay from Rhett Butler. He will tell us about the business model of how Mongabay achieved what it did and the impact that it has made. And a final comment, I'll give a shout out to some of our colleagues from the Stanford DCI program. And this is a first, as far as I'm involved with ALI and DCI, Harvard and Stanford. So welcome, DCI colleagues. So I'll pass the mic back to Lily.
Thank you, David and Charles. We are so honored to be here with people who are dedicating their lives to social change. And I just wanted to thank you for joining us, Harvard ALI and Stanford DCI. As Charles mentioned, we did an earlier part one of this webinar where we dove into our origin story and our journalism and the changing media landscape. I think we can post some links in the chat if you're interested in reviewing that first part one. Today, we're going to go into our business and impact model in more depth. We'll have a few speakers if weather conditions allow. Rhett Butler, our founder and CEO, will start us off. And we also have the head of our Africa Bureau, David Akana, joining us. He is currently in Cameroon. So he may not be able to maintain his connection because they're experiencing heavy rainfall, but if we're lucky, he'll be on. And lastly, Dave Martin will be talking about our fundraising and fundraising model and strategy. We are hoping to have a generous time at the end for question and answers, and discussion. So you're welcome to either hold your questions till the end, or please feel free to drop them in the chat. My colleagues Holly and Alec are online, and they'll be able to answer some of the more simple questions and paste in pertinent information and links. And with that, I'd like to get started. I'm going to hand over the torch to Rhett Butler, our founder and CEO. And before he dives in, I'm just really excited to mention that he was named by Forbes as one of the top 50 global leaders in sustainability last month during Climate Week. And he will also be receiving the Henry Shaw Medal from the Missouri Botanical Garden later this month. So we're really thrilled about the recognition and excited for all the work he does in guiding our organization. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rhett. I'm going to get this slideshow started, and we'll go from there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lily. And it's great to have this opportunity as well. And I'm impressed that everyone knows how to make the clapping signs on Zoom. I haven't tried to do that yet, but thank you. Yeah, so the first round of our presentation focused on the Mongabay backstory, and so this is much more focused on the business model. But I will just very quickly recap what Mongabay is in case people aren't familiar. You can go to the next slide, Lily. Uh, So we are a news service that covers issues at the intersection of people and nature in what we call impact geographies, so places where our journalism can actually contribute to change in the world. That tends to be primarily in the tropics. I would say probably 70-80% of our stories are about the tropics, where there's the greatest biodiversity and the highest rate of change and the highest degree of threat. We're structured around 6 regional bureaus across 6 languages. We're about to add 2 more languages. So that's Spanish for Spanish speaking Latin America. We have a Brazil team, which is doing Portuguese and English. We have a global bureau, which is English. We have India, which is Hindi and English, and soon to be Bengali. We have Mongabay Africa, which David Akana, who's on this call, heads. And so that's currently French and English. We're going to be launching in Swahili soon. Oh, and then we have Indonesia, which is Bahasa Indonesia or Indonesian. We have about 125 staff in about 30 countries and about 1,000 contributing journalists who are paid either on a per story or per project basis. They're in about 80 countries. We're producing written articles, video, and audio, which is either podcast or for radio distribution. We're gonna get this more later, but we are a nonprofit, so we're funded either via grants from foundations or individual donors of all different sizes. And we distribute our stories on our website via social media. And then we also give away our stories for free under a Open Creative Commons license, which means anyone can use them commercially or non-commercially. And we'll get into that a little bit later. In terms of next slide, please. In terms of what this looks like, kind of our history as a nonprofit, um, 2012 was really the first year of the nonprofit, and we've just kind of had steady compound growth over the past 13 years. Um, we've as we've expanded bureaus, but within each of those bureaus as well, we've had growth. Next slide, please. And this is our geographic distribution as of 2023. So this is staff and contributors. So the main difference since 2023 is Mongabay. We have a much better representation across Africa now. So back then it was our geography. We didn't have a lot of people, but again, we have many more now. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I mentioned, Mongabay is a nonprofit now. It didn't start that way. So I began Mongabay as a for-profit. Well, actually, I began it as nothing, but then eventually there was a for-profit model based on advertising. And so when you have the ad model was based off of traffic, and so the more traffic you had, the more revenue you generate. In 2011, I decided to to form a nonprofit to pursue ideas I had where there was no advertising-based business model. And so that first project was starting an Indonesian language news service. That went really well, as I talked about in the last session. And eventually we transitioned. I donated all the stories to the nonprofit, and we transitioned to the nonprofit model. Um, that was that wasn't necessarily out of need, it was out of opportunity. So this is kind of before a lot of the market started to sort of collapse for advertising, for online advertising. So we were ahead of the curve. It was very fortuitous to make that transition before it got bad. But grateful that happened. And so the main thing that happened when we went from from a for-profit to a nonprofit is we went from an ads model to an impact model. And so when we made that transition, it had very significant implications for how we made decisions and how we operated as an organization. And so one of those key things was a deeper focus on audience. And so this meant a greater emphasis on who rather than how many. So who are we actually reaching? Next slide, please. And so manga-based target groups, we're not necessarily trying to be a mass market publication. I mean, mass market is great, but we don't have the resources to do a hearts and minds strategy. So we're really focusing on key decision makers in certain sectors who, if they're provided with information, that our theory of change says that they will make they'll make better decisions. At least it's predicated on the idea that people use facts and information for decision making, which isn't always the case, as we know. But so some of those user groups include conservation practitioners. So this is people from academics to NGO staff. So think of people who work at the Nature Conservancy or WWF, to frontline people like rangers who are working in parks. Another group is advocacy groups and activists. So think of like Global Witness or Greenpeace, which are doing campaigns around issues. Educators, everything from TK up to college professors. People who are in the agencies that manage natural resources. So think of Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Fisheries, NOAA, institutions like that. Um, Overseas development agencies. So what used to be USAID or DFID or NORAD in Norway, and international finance institutions, so World Bank, UN. Um, People who are in the private sector working on managing commodity supply chains. So think of like Nestle, they're worried about where the cacao is coming from or where they're sourcing their palm oil. People who are in the investment space, so looking at environmental criteria of investments, philanthropy, and then a really important group is environmental crime prosecutors and investigators. Those are people who are looking at when environmental crime is committed and then prosecuting um, people who've broken environmental laws. Next slide. And so, once you have your target audience, you really need to think about how do those target audiences actually make decisions? So where do they get information? What kind of information do they need? What motivates them? Who do they listen to? All these questions. Next slide. So just for example, what that means, this is from a few years ago. We had an investigative team that was looking at this massive oil palm plantation, which is being established in Indonesia and New Guinea. So oil palm is used to produce palm oil, which is a widely used vegetable oil. And this thing was just massive. It was one of the biggest plantations ever proposed. And as they were digging into it, they found evidence of a $22 million bribe being paid. And so that was like one of the aspects of the story. But what we did is we produced a second story that came off that investigation on how a prosecutor could pursue a case into this corruption. And so basically had a trail of breadcrumbs that was laid out in the story. And after that story came out, Indonesia's anti-corruption agency initiated a case. We think largely based off the information we provided. And so that was an example of a very specific target audience where we believe that if we provided information, we're not telling what to do or think, but providing that information, it can lead to an outcome in the world. Next slide. Um, and so, sorry. Yeah, and so our response to these to becoming a nonprofit is to really take an approach that's based off of iteration, so trying things and learning as we go along, but then also being responsive to the market. So what is a strategy in the United States might be different from a strategy in Peru or Indonesia. And so one of the key aspects of this, I mentioned earlier that our stories are produced under an Open Creative Commons license. And so what that means is that under a for-profit model, if we're trying to maximize advertising revenue, we're not going to be giving away our stories because we want people to come to our website so we can monetize that traffic. With the for-profit model, we don't necessarily need people to read our stories on our website. And so if the mainstream newspapers in Peru or Colombia or Singapore are republishing our stories, we're more likely to reach the key decision makers who we're trying to reach. And so what that means is a lot of our stories have very wide distribution in mainstream media outlets in other countries. Another aspect to this on the distribution side is thinking about what platforms we should invest our time and resources into in order to reach our target audiences. So really thinking about the impact. And so uh, I'll go to the next example, but like on a high end, you might say there's like a short form video that might do well on TikTok, but do people who watch that video, are they gonna change behavior. I mean, they might buy something, but are they gonna care about the nuance, and are they gonna lead to some sort of outcome? Are they going to contribute to some sort of outcome? So, if you're just targeting certain audiences, then TikTok may not be the right platform for driving impact in the world. So next slide. So a very practical example of this comes from a few years ago. So back in the late 2010s, in the early years of the pandemic, Facebook emerged as one of our most important sources of traffic. So we're talking about 80% of our external referral traffic to our website was coming from Facebook. And so that means people would go to Facebook and they click on a link and they come to Mongabay. But analyzing the data, we could see that the quality of the engagement from Facebook was extremely low. So people would come to the website, they'd be there for a few seconds and they would leave. So they wouldn't scroll down, they wouldn't click on multiple articles. And we also had anecdotal evidence where there were far fewer examples of us hearing where someone had seen something on Facebook and then taken some action. So back in like 2010, you'd regularly hear about someone would see something on Facebook that was a manga-based story, and then they would like create a petition that was signed by 1 million people, or a prosecutor was using Facebook and they came across, like wildlife trafficking that was in a manga-based story, and then they would do an investigation, something like that. We almost never heard of those anecdotal evidence or evidence cases involving Facebook, in the early 2020s. And so basically we decided, well, we're gonna try to deprioritize Facebook and focus on platforms that drive higher quality engagement. And so around May 2021, we automated Facebook and focused our social media efforts on other platforms. So we gave a heads up to our board and some of our donors that we were doing this just to make them aware that there may be a significant change. And so sure enough, traffic from Facebook collapsed after we did that. And that's represented by the blue line. Can you actually go back, Lily? So that's represented by the blue bars. So the red shows the aggregate amount of time that people actually spend on Mongabay. And so what you'll see is the aggregate amount of time that people spend on Mongabay actually increased, relative to the year before. So we didn't actually, so people were spending in aggregate more time on Mongabay, even though we had lost this huge source of traffic. And so that just showed that a lot of the Facebook traffic was empty and wasn't really worth anything from an impact standpoint. So again, this wasn't a decision we would have made as a for-profit, because we would have been talking about a lot of ad revenue. But as a nonprofit, our North Star was really around impact. And so it made a lot of sense. Next slide. And so this shows just impressions by platform and how this changes over time. Facebook and X or used to be Twitter, have both declined significantly, whereas LinkedIn has become a major source of traffic. Next slide. And so this is maybe a little bit confusing, but on the vertical axis, those are the different platforms. On the horizontal axis, there's something called engagement score. So that's like the quality of engagement. It's based on the number of indicators. And then the size of the bubble shows the amount of traffic that we're getting from that platform, just for our website, not within those platforms. And so we can see that LinkedIn is not only the largest source of traffic, but it's also very high quality. And we're also collecting a lot of anecdotal data, which I'll get into in a minute, or qualitative data, which shows that people are reading something on LinkedIn and then taking some action as a result of seeing the Mongabay story. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so beyond the platforms and distribution, we're also putting a strong emphasis on impact within our newsroom. So we're talking, within the newsroom, if someone's doing an investigation, we will have conversations about, okay, well, who really needs to get this information, and what kind of information they actually need that might contribute to a real world outcome. And again, we're not talking advocacy where we're trying to tell people what to do or think. We're trying to target information to the right person at the right time. And then the other aspect of this is building systems for tracking impact and reporting on that impact. Next slide. Yeah, and so when I talk about impact, my board often says, "Well, we want one number. Like, how do you track impact with just like one number?" The challenge is I haven't found what that one single metric is. So we're talking about success in different ways. And so the way that we try to evaluate this is both quantitative aspects, but then also qualitative dimensions. And so, in the end, we're trying to understand how information helps drive real world change when it comes to the environment and the other issues we talk about. Next slide, please. So what I mean by quantitative indicators. So these are things that we can count. So things like the number of stories or videos we produce, the readership, viewership, and engagement on those stories, activity on social media, republication by other media outlets. And so all these things are easy to measure, but they only give us a partial picture of what our impact actually is. Next slide, please. And so the thing that we find to be the most interesting aspect of impact tracking is on the qualitative side. And so we do a story and then things happen afterwards. And so each of those things tends to be anecdotal. And sometimes you have very strong evidence that it was linked to a Mongabay story, so you have attribution. Other times you don't have attribution. So just for example, like we have cases where we've done reporting, there's someone in the Ministry of Environment and Forestry in Indonesia who tells us that the minister read the story and talked about it in a meeting and then decided to do something as a result. So that's nice because we have a trail which can attribute the decision back to the story. That's rare when we have sort of that level of the sort of chain of custody of how the process worked. But we do collect as much information as we can, and then we put it back into an impact database. And so we have a whole number of really interesting stories about how Mongobay's reporting has contributed to some impact in the world. In my last presentation, I talked about this case where there was a company that was destroying forests in the Amazon. We did reporting on it, and then activists did campaigns, the public prosecutor did an investigation, and eventually the company was delisted from London Stock Exchange, which meant that about 100,000 hectares of forest, or 250,000 acres, wasn't cleared. There are lots of other examples of that. I'll just, I guess, cite one real quick, which would be from Gabon, which is a country in West Africa. And so we had a local contributor done reporting about this community that was about to lose its ancestral forest to a foreign logging company. And so we reported on the issue. I caught the eye of the environment minister of Gabon, and he went and visited. And after he visited, they revoked the permit of the logging company, and they recognized the community's right to the forest. And so it was the first time of having a bottom-up conservation project in Gabon where the traditional landowners had their rights recognized and the forest was protected as a community forest. Next slide. And so then some other just kind of things that we're looking at when we're talking about the qualitative impacts. Sometimes you can turn these qualitative impacts into quantitative numbers. So we had an independent evaluation last year, which looked at which did a whole bunch of surveys, and they found that almost three-quarters of the people who responded to the surveys actually used Mongabay stories for guiding decision making. And then another interesting number that came out of that process was that about three-quarters of respondents said that their stories would not otherwise be published if Mongabay hadn't published them. And so, these are all great examples of how our journalism or journalism generally can help contribute to impact in the world. Next slide. Yeah, so the last thing I wanted to emphasize before I hand it off to David is how we're looking to amplify impact in the future. So we have three areas where we're investing a lot to expand. One is solutions journalism. So I talked about this in the last presentation, but more than 40% of people now are tuning out from the news because it bums them out and they don't trust journalists. But those news avoiders often still read solution stories and positive stories. So it's a way to reach people who are otherwise tuning out. It's also a great way to help people who are anxious or have eco anxiety about the state of the world and how biodiversity is being lost and climate change and all those things. We're also expanding into countries and languages and topics where we feel like our journalism can have a marginal impact. And then we're also trying to bring more data, primary data sources into our reporting. So whether that's satellite data or data from bioacoustic networks, and use that for both fact checking, but then also sourcing stories out of that data. Next slide. And then we have two new initiatives that we think could really be catalytic for us. One is bringing an impact editor into the newsroom. That would allow us to even think more about very specific target audiences and how we might have spin-off stories to reach that one key decision maker, or the 50 key decision makers, that would help make a difference. And then the other major initiative that we're looking to get off the ground is called Story Transformer. And this is would leverage generative AI to do transformation of stories into languages and formats that we're not currently doing, as a way to reach micro decision makers. So think about like a small farmer in Nigeria who speaks Nigerian pidgin, or an artisanal fisherman off Tanzania who speaks Swahili. And so taking a 1,500 word story in English about the livelihood benefits of doing a short-term fisheries closure, and having that adapted into a 90-second audio message in Swahili for WhatsApp. So they don't have to use data, they don't have to pay for data to access the story. They don't necessarily have to know how to read, they don't have to speak English. It's all right there. And there would be a human editor in the loop to ensure accuracy, but also serve as a listening function so we can actually get information back from those frontline micro decision makers and bring it back into the news ecosystem and then report on it as well. Next slide. Yeah, so I'll stop there and hand off to David.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Red. I really appreciate it. I'd like to recognize Lily, Dave, and the entire team for putting this together. I've spent the entire day working towards this event, but unfortunately, just before this event, power went out because we have a thunderstorm over the city of Yaoundé. So I'm from Yaoundé, Cameroon, which sits in the Congo Basin. And so great to be with all of you. I have 5 slides, and basically, I'm just going to be sort of just showing you how we're doing most of the things that Red has already talked about, whether that be solutions journalism or working towards impact, as opposed to just looking at clicks and views and all of those different indicators that traditional media would use. So 2023 marked a milestone in the work that we're doing, because that's when we actually decided to expand Mongabay Africa. And before we did that, we made sure that we sat down and gave it a serious thought with respect to how do we go into an African market with a new political and geopolitical reality with a Western media, knowing fully well the history of Western media and how it has covered the continent. And so we decided to put together a strategy. That's the cover page of the document. We're actually revising it now to actually focus on the next 2 or 3 years moving forward. And so what we try to do is balance accountability journalism, which is the hard-hitting investigative reporting, alongside with solutions journalism. And for a continent that is generally viewed from the outside, and sometimes even from the outside, from the inside, from a very negative perspective, we thought that we needed to find a way to inspire people. Now, I know that if you're in journalism, this lends to a lot of debate, whether does that mean going soft? But no, it simply means being balanced as far as journalism is concerned. So we put together the strategy, and that's what guides the work that we are actually doing at this point. I just want to focus on the second slide and then move on to just show you a little bit of how we are actually creating impact. Here is why we did this. So if you do content analysis of media content across the continent, you do studies and look at the studies that have been done across the last couple of years, what you're going to see is that, for the most part, Africa is covered from a gloom and doom perspective. It's that things never work. There's no leadership. There's always war. There's always corruption. But the question is that the only thing, or are those the only things that happen in Africa? And I think the answer is no. But if you even move that a little bit further, what you understand is that there's news fatigue. People are avoiding news. People are disengaging. And once you go in that direction, what that simply means is that the media could actually not be relevant anymore. And so you have to find approaches that rebalances the news, leads people to take action, and obviously create hope. And that's where the solutions journalism concept comes into the work that we're doing. If you move to the third slide, because I know that we don't have a lot of time, I think we've used up 32 minutes. I just want to show you a little bit of the impact of the work that we're doing, because I think this is actually where I think we can create impact among all the other media
we may have lost David momentarily because of the rainstorm, but let's just wait a little bit to see. He's been kind of coming in and out, so hopefully he'll jump back in.
Abroad, but decided to go back home and work in conservation. Now, the reason why I'm raising this particular story is because, as you may know, whether it's in the West or maybe even sometimes in Africa, the perception here is that, young people tend to want to go out.
Mhm.
David, sorry for the interruption, everyone. It's one of the pitfalls of working for a global organization. The weather doesn't always comply. David? David?
Yeah, I guess if you can't hear me anymore, then the connection is probably bad. Can you hear me, Lily?
Yeah, you're going in and out. I'm wondering, given the poor connection, if you want to end with something. Um, Unfortunately, we missed a lot of the prior example that you were giving us.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you can get me, but again, apologies. Obviously, didn't set this up to have to apologize because I really wanted to do this so bad. But perhaps if I could just conclude, the bottom line here would be that to follow up from what Red said, it is an exciting time for us in Mongabay, Africa, because we are expanding geographically, meaning that before it was mostly in the Congo Basin where there is, of course, the second tropical rainforest. But now we expanding to West Africa, including the Sahel, and in significant ways to East Africa. And also from a linguistic perspective, because in addition to French and English, we now have Swahili, which is covering 190 million people across East Africa. That's the only way in which we get to connect and ensure that the work that we're doing becomes meaningful to local audiences. Obviously, we can share some of the impacts that I put together for this, great group of people. We can share that with them soon after this. But again, I can end there. Obviously, happy to, participate in a Q&A if the internet allows. Thanks, Lily. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, David. For some reason, I mean, you're coming in loud and clear now, so maybe we can just resume where you left off. Sorry for the start stop.
All right, no worries. Thank you. Well, this is the condition in which we work. So for us, we're a lot more resilient and we can do this regardless. So second example for me here would just be the recent story we did in the DRC. As you might know, the DRC is, obviously has rich reservoirs of minerals from, cobalt to copper and all the other critical minerals that you might know about. And so we've been doing a lot of reporting in the east of the country. And one of the recent ones we did was the impact of cobalt and copper mining on local populations. So we looked at how it's leading to water contamination, destroying crops, leading to serious health and forcing displacements of communities. What we liked about this particular story is that 1 year after, and this was this year, we found out that the government of the DRC, based in Kinshasa, actually issued a multi-billion-dollar tax bill to the companies identified in our reporting as of having contributed to polluting the environment. So we find that to be very relevant. And of course, the question here is always, how much did you contribute to this, or this is attributed to you? What we do know, of course, is that why the government might not have mentioned Mongabay in any specific way, the companies that we actually identified in our investigation were actually the ones that were sanctioned. I'll just share the last example, and perhaps I could hand it over to Dave to talk about the business model. Last slide here is just in South Africa. So our work is also leading to policy implementation. In 2021, we did some work around a new tool called Lion Localizer. It uses DNA testing to pinpoint the geographical sources of contraband lion. And this work was done by the University of Illinois. What we do know, of course, is that Sandpark, which is the public park in South Africa, is now using this tool to be able to improve its anti-poaching activities in South Africa. We can name more and more if we had a lot more time. And actually, in mongabay.org on the impact side, you can see a lot of these impacts because we document them every quarter. And that for us, it's our way, for us, I think it's the best way in which we bring value to the overall work of ensuring further transparency on conservation issues across the large geography, which is Africa. Let me hand it over to you, Lily. Happy to participate. Hopefully the internet is okay and I can take some questions at the end. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. I've just been notified that my slides are not showing right now. So let me try to pop those back up. But in the meantime, I would like to hand the mic over to Dave Martin, who is our Director of Philanthropy. He will be talking about our business model and our funding model while I try to figure out how to put these slides back on.
Okay. Thanks, Rhett. Thanks, David. I know it's late for you. So as you all have ascertained by now, Mongabay is a nonprofit. So fundraising is a crucial aspect of our business model. Rhett and David have alluded to the strengths of nonprofit news already, so I thought it might be interesting to talk about our fundraising approach. You can break down our funding into buckets: institutional donors, major donors, and grassroots level giving. In our case, institutional donors hold the most prominent position, followed by major donors, and grassroots contributions actually come in at a distant third. Next slide, Lil, are they up?
Are you
Okay.
able to see
Yeah,
the slides
up,
now?
Dave.
It's up. Okay, I can't see it for some reason. It's not showing up on my computer. So just like any for-profit business, we have to provide a very clear business proposition or value proposition to attract funding. In our case, Mongabay's value really lies squarely in real-world impact, and that's what most serious funders care about. So at the end of the day, people really want to support causes because they contribute to change. It's our job to demonstrate why our organization is a viable avenue to have that impact. So let's take a look at these boxes here. Why Mongabay? Why now? Well, Mongabay has a strong track record of impact, a trusted reputation, and strong credibility. We have driven transparency and accountability in regions where it matters most. And we are unique. We're oftentimes the only outlet that's covering critical issues. Next slide, please. So when I'm speaking to a funder in the environmental space, I'm interested to learn who they're funding and why. I know that Mongabay could be a central piece of their impact strategy and potentially work synergistically with the other donations that they're making, because Mongabay has an extraordinary uptake at critical decision-making levels, as Rhett was alluding to earlier. This drives accountability, transparency, and fills vital information gaps, which leads to informed decision-making where it matters most and when it matters most. This creates an enabling environment for positive change. Next slide, please. A funder is often interested in a certain region or theme in their work. So we have conversations with them to ascertain where we can have the most impact. They can support a bureau like Mongabay Africa. We're lucky to have David on the call today, or a reporting desk like our Oceans desk or our Indigenous News desk. Or sometimes they may wish to support a special reporting project where our independent journalism can dig into a specific issue like illegal wildlife trade or nature-based solutions to climate change. Ideally, they're willing to offer general operating support, which, as we all know, is life support for any nonprofit organization. These are all avenues that support our independent global newsroom, and we have a firewall in place that maintains editorial independence. Next slide. Okay. So let's take a look at this in the context of a philanthropic portfolio that focuses on environment and climate. Here's an imaginary environmental donor. We're going to call her Tina. Tina has a variety of concerns. She loves animals. She identifies as an environmentalist, and she's read that activists and journalists are under extreme threat all around the world. She's concerned about dwindling resources for humans and wildlife alike. And she sees smog on her drive to work every day and wants to combat pollution. So Tina's portfolio actually begins to mirror her concerns. She's involved in programmatic work. For example, biological corridors in the Andes that connect rich islands of biodiversity. She's engaging in advocacy work as well, as specifically Indigenous rights organizations lobbying for equity and autonomy. She values environmental justice and wants to support causes that link human rights to a clean and livable environment. Community projects, well, she doesn't want to take a top-down approach, so she supports at the community level. And for donors like Tina, we must make the case that Mongabay adds value to all of our other giving through the mechanisms that we've all discussed today. Next slide. So I think the best analogy that applies to our global impact is a rising tide floats all boats. Effective journalism can strengthen civil society and decision making. It raises awareness around critical topics and builds informed coalitions that move the needle on climate and the environment. Next slide. Okay, so we've reached the end of our presentation. I really just want to say thank you, everybody. We're so appreciative for this opportunity. This doesn't come around often. I hope this presentation and the last presentation was informative. I think the bottom line is that credible and actionable information can be like our guiding light as we head into an uncertain future. And despite much of our media failing us and dividing us, there are alternative news models out there that work incredibly well, despite the odds being stacked against us at the moment. So thank you very much. Lily, if you could take the microphone back.
All right. Well, thank you to our speakers for sharing today. I would like to open things up to a Q&A. So feel free to, we have a manageable number of participants, so feel free to unmute if you have a question to ask. And just to start us off, we received some interesting questions in the chat. So let's start off with a question from Brian Perlman. He's wondering if you can talk a little bit more about investigating ecocide. And do you support international investigative mechanisms or law enforcement and prosecutors? Can you also talk a little bit about how the definition of ecocide as codified into law has changed in recent years and where it is heading?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not an expert in ecocide, but we have definitely done reporting on it. And there's ecocide activists who use our stories quite often. And so I think typically the way this manifests is Mongabay does reporting on a situation that either activists or ecocide-oriented lawyers use as an example of ecocide being committed, and then they will pursue the next steps in that process. But so that's typically what it would look like. We, we're not an advocacy organization, so we don't necessarily have an organizational position on ecocide, but it is an issue that we cover.
Thanks, Rhett. Keller, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, hi there. Keller Strother, I'm out in Palo Alto. Thanks to Charles and his crew for kind of organizing, getting some of us from the Stanford program involved with this. It's very exciting to kind of cross the two cohorts. I'm really impressed with what you're doing. I had not followed your work in the past, but certainly will in the future. And wondering how much is the kind of politicization, the toxicness of the political space getting in the way of your work? And have you found strategies that have helped you be successful in navigating that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a big question. So we're operating in many different countries, and so there are there are varying degrees of polarization and sort of degradation of the information ecosystem. In terms of in the U.S. context, we have not really been directly affected too much by the recent politics. That said, we're concerned about freedom of speech and sort of some of the trends around media protections. In other countries, we've been navigating these issues for a long time, so we have some experience. Specifically in Latin America, we found in the past 12 months, and really the last 6 months, there's been an increase in effort in legal actions against media. So we've had um, legal complaints. We have a court case right now. Um, so we're constantly navigating these issues. We also operate in some places where there are risks and threats to journalists, and so we have a safety protocol and a safety committee that evaluates risk. So if someone's going out to the field, like if for the reporting in Brazil, we have an assessment process that we go through. And this process not only applies to our staff, but it applies to contributors. And also, there are considerations for sources because a journalist, maybe they're from Jakarta, and when they go to Kalimantan, they're visiting, but then they can leave, whereas the local community cannot leave. And so when that story comes out, it could have implications for those sources. And so we are very cognizant of the risks to journalists, but also sources. So that's kind of a long-winded response, but I guess to summarize, it's complex, but it's something we've been navigating well before the current issues in the United States.
Thank you. We have a couple questions waiting. Linda, I saw your hand next.
Yeah, this is following on what Rhett was just talking about with the safety protocols, but I wondered if David had examples of how that actually works on the ground in the Africa Bureau, keeping reporters, sources, keeping people safe, and how that fits into your business model.
Great. Well, thank you, Linda. Yes, of course, the safety protocol, it's global, but also, but it guides the work that we do in our different regions. So here's how it works. So for the most part, story proposals are submitted to the safety committee, and the safety committee evaluates it based on the risk, the location of the story, the actors involved, the press freedom in the country or in the region, but also the individual involved in the reporting or who is leading the reporting also has an assessment, and sometimes will tell you that, I know X and Y sources, and I know how I can get to them, and get the information without any risk to my life. So all of that combined leads us to provide a green light to the reporting, or maybe just call off the reporting based on conditions of the ground and maybe move it to another time. So it's a combination of variables that leads us to the final decision. And we take that very seriously because, as we usually say in the newsroom, we want to live longer to continue to do reporting. So concretely, that's how it works. The other point here could be, have we faced harassments? Have we faced intimidation? Yes, that's pretty constant as far as we are concerned. And I have to give it to the people in the newsroom for braving all of this and to continue doing the work that they're doing, because you've had to be very courageous to be able to go through system like ours. So if you look at my country, for instance, Cameroon, where the leadership has been there for 43 years, it means less transparency, it means less media freedom. And so to have to stand up to these individuals, I always say I give it to all the members of the newsroom. And yes, for the most part, we haven't had any really bad kind of, situation whereby it's led to somebody being imprisoned in recent years in our newsroom. We haven't had that, but we've had intimidations. We've had cases where we have to anonymize because anonymization is part of the whole part of standard practice in newsroom, where we will not identify a specific individual to a specific report because we do not want them to be hurt. So perhaps a little bit long, Linda, but again, that's how we implement the protocol, and those are some of the challenges that we see in the field.
Rhett, did you want to add something to that? I see your hands up.
Yeah, so in East Africa, we did have to put a contributor and his family into hiding for 3 to 4 months because our risk assessment concluded that there was a material risk to his safety. So we have taken actions like that. But again, as David said, we have not had any major issues in Africa to date.
Great, thank you. So I see Gary has a question in the chat, and Shelley, I do see your hand up, so I will get to you soon. So Gary's question is, have you thought about using a modified version of an AI plagiarism tool to look for content that can be traced back to a Mongabay story?
Yeah, so we had that implemented for about 15 years, not with AI, but with like a script I built using Google and some other tools. Um, I would say it was a really mixed bag because it brings back a lot of not useful stuff, but I do think it is on our list of things to reevaluate now with some of the models. Gives you I guess more it could result in better matches than you get with keywords, and so it is on our list to reevaluate that. But yeah, we're definitely aligned on that thinking.
Great, thank you. And Shelley.
Well, first of all, I just want to say how impressive this is, everything you've shared today. And my question really goes to journalism in general. There are many people that feel that the future of journalism, with a few exceptions, is nonprofit. And I'm wondering about what often happens in industries, consolidation, and what you feel about for you and for others, maybe not in the environmental journalism world, but others. What do you think about collaboration beyond what you do today, consolidation? Could that help you, not help? And what about, would it help or not help the field of journalism in general?
Yeah, I think it just really depends on the fit. I mean, Mongabay is very collaborative, so we work with a lot of partners. One of the challenges that we have is ensuring that the partners do what they commit to do. And so we often find that we bring a lot of the heavy lifting to the partnerships, and so it ends up being a cost center for us. So I think I mean, it's getting better over time, but I do think consolidation, can be quite valuable. There's been some, mergers in the space. So, we're not opposed to it. It just would have to be the right opportunity. But in many cases, yeah, bigger can add advantages in terms of scale, in terms of, like safety protocols and things like that. Um, so it's something that I would expect to see continue as more media outlets kind of go into the nonprofit space. I think another big issue in the journalism realm is how AI is going to affect things, both in terms of supply and demand. Yeah, so I think in a perfect world, you would say um, you have a lot of AI slop out there, which is not really credible. It's more entertainment. And so journalism becomes one of the few sources of original information that comes into the information ecosystem. That said, I think a bigger problem is on the demand side and whether people actually care about information being fact-based, or whether they're just looking for something that fits their worldview, or if they just want to be entertained. And so there are issues beyond the scope of what we have control over, but I'm hopeful that people will still place a value on accurate information.
You and me both. So thank you. That was very helpful.
We are almost at the end of the hour. Does anyone have any last questions before we sign off for the evening?
David does.
Can you see me?
Yep.
Brett, this is great, and I really appreciate you taking the time and appreciate all the good work you're doing on behalf of the environment. As you think about where you go from here, if you had to kind of roll the camera forward 5 years, 10 years, where do you see the opportunity for Mongabay to kind of grow and continue to have impact?
Yeah, so I think geographically, Africa is a huge place for us. I mean, there's a lot of change happening there. The majority of population growth in the world is going to occur in Africa. So, David's role here is really critical for thinking about the future. Another is really thinking about how do you reach those frontline audiences that exist in information deserts. And so that's kind of where the story transformer conceptual framework comes in of reaching people where they're at in their own languages. I think that will get better as time goes on, just by the nature of technology. But just being sure that good information is actually good, credible information is reaching them. So those are like two of the big areas I'd flag. We're also expanding into some topic areas, which we haven't done as much before. So the concept of planetary health, so things like the ecosystems that sustain us, but also pollutants, novel chemicals, whether that's plastic or something else. So digging into those issues. So I guess I would stop there, but those are three buckets.
Great. Looking forward. And I signed up for the newsletter, so I'm looking forward to tracking you more carefully. Thank
Great.
you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. I also wanted to thank Faye for adding so many links that we can all access in the chat. That was really helpful. So I really appreciate your efforts there. So once again, thank you to Harvard ALI and the organizers and Stanford DCI for joining us today. We are so delighted to have this conversation, and we always value your feedback and your input. If you are interested in continuing the discussion, or if you're interested in finding more about any aspect of Mongabay in more detail, we would love to talk to you. We will be sending out an email probably in the next day or so with this recording and with contact information. And with that, I will just leave you with a big extension of gratitude and hope you have a really good evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Great presentation.
Thank you.
all.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.